1. Alright, here we go. My first and probably juiciest tale of the neckbeard I met off Grindr, I think. Also, just like a general trigger warning for gross, semi-disturbing content of a sexual and mildly threatening nature. Nothing too graphic. Keep in mind, this was nearly 5 years ago now, back in 2018. I was pretty freshly 18 myself and ready to fuck things up. Things being my own mental health, as it turns out. That's how I ended up on Grindr. I, 18 at the time and 23 currently, am female-to-male transgender, and was pre-everything at the time of this story, and still a virgin. For some reason I had huge insecurity about that, even though I was either still in high school or fresh out of it. My memory isn't the greatest, so some of the timeline and details may be fuzzy. So, I was set on meeting people, hooking up, all of that. I matched this guy, Dave. Sorry to any Daves out there. He's around my age, 18 or 19, and he lives like really close by. Shockingly close by, exactly 1 mile away. Okay, so we get to talking. And Dave is very interested in the fact that I'm transgender. Most in the trans community will agree that a cis person taking very intense interest in that is a red flag. Other than that, I honestly don't remember the nuances of the chat, but in my eyes the fact that I found someone okay with my gender on a mainly gay dating app was a huge score. He wouldn't be the last guy I thought I got lucky to match with and ended up being oh so wrong about. But that's a story for another time. I also have a very hard time connecting with people my age, and was honestly sort of attention-starved, so I agreed to meet up. However, I didn't yet have a car, so I'd have to ask my guardian to drive me. It didn't occur to me just to walk. I guess it seemed a greater distance in my head, and I was paranoid I'd get caught doing so. My guardian is a bit of a helicopter parent, and she cares for us deeply, obviously. So there was no way in hell I'd be honest about meeting up with a stranger from Grindr, or be able to walk down the busy road, or be honest about anything, really. If I remember right, he couldn't drive yet either, and wouldn't have a way to meet in public unless I picked him up. In my mind, my guardian would 100% know he was a stranger if we got in a car together, to have her drive us somewhere public, so obviously the smarter idea would be to claim I reconnected with an old friend from early high school or middle school, whichever one I said, and that I wanted to go to his house. That's right, I asked her to drop me off at a stranger's house under the guise it was someone I knew. I didn't make the wisest decisions back then, and as I said, I was mentally ill. I didn't have much regard for my own physical safety. In my mind, the fact that the house was right across the street, literally from 2 gas stations, meant I'd be safe. And worst case, I could simply run from the house and to the gas station. I also, as stated before, was a virgin and not happy with the fact that I was. So it's likely I also had that motive there as well. I was on Grindr after all. So, now with the scene set up, let the real story begin. I get dropped off, wave off my guardian, and he lets me inside. Again, some of the details will be fuzzy, but I don't remember much that was significant upon first impressions. This house may have been a tad messy, and I don't really recall the first things we talked about, or did until he said we should go to his basement. I also don't fully remember his appearance. I likely blocked it out to some degree, and you'll see why later. But also I don't think that the appearance makes the neckbeard, so it's not really relevant. He was a bit short, a bit chubby, but hell, so was I. He also had dark hair and some facial hair, maybe a slight neckbeard. That's about all I got. Anyway, so yes, it wasn't that long in at all that he says we should go to his basement, which he warned me was unfinished. That was fine, and I agreed. As a person, now, and especially back then, I've always sort of been a go-with-the-flow type. I just enjoy quality time, so whatever someone else wanted to do, I was usually down for. He also warns me that a lot of his dad's stuff is down there, but that his dad wasn't around because he was in jail. Something about the way he said it, I remember felt a bit off. But I didn't want to pry because it was my first time meeting the dude. I wasn't going to ask his family history, so down we went. It's exactly what you're imagining, a slightly unfinished basement. On the walls were shelves, absolutely covered in anime figures, posters, a messy desk and computer. The entire area was messy, and stuff was sort of thrown all over the place, and there was a smell to it that I couldn't identify. It didn't, reek. I think it was bearable, or it was so bad I went noseblind, I don't remember. But there definitely wasn't anything to do in the basement. There wasn't really anywhere to sit. I had no earthly idea what we would be doing down in his dad's Neckbeard basement. I don't remember what we talked about at first, but then he started showing me all his dad's stuff in decent detail. He pointed out a couple of the anime figures. We spent a long time looking at the sword, katana collection. I wish I were joking. That's about when my red flag alarm finally kicked in, but my fight or flight reaction has actually always, unfortunately, been fawn. Which, if you don't know, basically means to fawn over someone, or make yourself as appealing and as agreeable as possible. Any plans I had to escape to a gas station before coming here left my brain when I was in an actually scary situation. I think I even remember him making jokes about how he could hurt me with said weapons. I think I could remember the interactions in full, but I do remember being and feeling threatened, which he then laughed off. This wouldn't be the last time my safety was the butt of a joke with Dave either. I'm pretty bad at being honest with myself, as well as reading social cues. Turns out I'm most likely autistic. And I think that when he was laughing about it and ended up changing the subject, I took that as he was just joking and didn't understand his sense of humor. But anyway, so he moved on from the swords to something even more disturbing. He had this real big, amused smile when he said he has something else to show me, and brought me over toward the center of the nest, near the desk and computer. I was just relieved to get away from the weapons, as some of them looked pretty dang sharp. However, what he had to show me was, please brace yourselves, his dad's blow-up sex doll. One of the classic ones with the O-shaped mouths that were probably pretty cheap. He literally picked it up and was laughing about it. Though I don't fully remember what he said about it. I think I was probably in a state of shock. Who wouldn't be? At the time, I believed it was all his dad's stuff. Currently, I sort of question that being the case. But I doubt he could afford all that stuff either. I don't recall him having a job. There's a chance it was his older brothers who lived there with him as well. Regardless, if it was his, it's really weird to lie about it being his dad's. Or to even show me all the stuff in the first place. And if it was his dad's or brother's, why on earth would you be picking it up and holding it? It didn't visibly look, used or anything. But according to Dave, it had been used, so just icky, gross, just yuck, man. The worst part about this entire story. We ended up in an empty, unfinished, sketchy part of the basement that at least smelled a bit better. New house would smell. Where I ended up making out with him. And at some point that day, I can't remember, I lost my virginity to him in the end. Like I said, I didn't make good decisions back then. In fact, I went back there semi-frequently for a while, which ended in more horror stories. Those stories are just sort of fucked up, more than they're neckbeardy, I guess. 2. 'Tis I, that green bear, and I have made the post-COVID mistake of going out to dinner after. It is where I ran into tonight's specimen, Twiggy, as I am still switching between shivering from cringe and shaking from laughter. I shall share my short encounter in the hopes of sharing the mirth and cringe. Enjoy. So my boyfriend had informed me that I will be on my own this Friday, as he has an after-work thing. No biggie. I made plans to play Heroes of Might and Magic 3 with a friend online and chill. Nothing like staying in and playing games on a Friday. Alas, 'twas not to be, as I was informed boyfriend's party was one down, and he asked me the magical question, "Do you want free steak?" I was gone faster than I could type to my gaming buddy, "Sorry, another time." We show up at the restaurant early and sip drinks with the boyfriend and chit-chat. Eventually, his 5 co-workers shuffle in. Normal, pasty IT guys, the lot of them. Though Twiggy was a little extra, he didn't smell, but he was thin and string bean, short and sporting a mustache that screamed barely legal and growing hair, even though he was in his 30s. He had a mess of not quite short or long strawberry blonde hair, and his stash that is struggling to validate his existence is teetering on the edge of being classified as red. He has a messy, oversized hoodie on for a somewhat classy restaurant because, of course, I feel massive shaking his childlike hand that's ice cold and nothing but bones. He was like a meth head, without the meth. I sit sandwiched between boyfriend and Twiggy, and the conversation starts off civil and normal enough, except he seems to think 90 decibels is the volume in which humans speak. I hurt, and pretty quickly the descent down the cringe slide begins, not just volume, but content-wise too. Twiggy inquires what I do for a living. When I inform him my job title within IT, the word IT seems to spark joy in his beady little eyes. Contains the word manager too. He decides to ask me the following gem.
Say, are you as pissed off about the female quotas as I am? Don't you just hate it when they hire someone because they're female? Like, I don't want to sound bigoted, but I hate corporate makes me think about these things when unqualified women get put in positions of power just because they're women.
Oh no, Twiggy, no. I think to myself as I'm frozen with a customer service smile while my brain boots from what he just said. I am female too, by the way. He goes on to explain how some female, or the female on their team, got promoted to manager, and it just wasn't fair because she's so bad at it. I gathered she had been at her new position for maybe a week, if even that. He really tries to dig a yes out of me for the dislike of women being hired just for being women, and scoffs at news that this company has globally a rate of 33% females in positions of power.
I bet there's quite a lot of quota filling there, too. I don't want to be that guy, but this crap just makes me think like that guy.
Now, since I don't want to be harsh and admittedly don't know Twiggy, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I explain gently that, the quotas exist for a reason, and hopefully they're just a stopgap measure we don't have to have forever when equality becomes natural, and doesn't need to be enforced by having a quota. Also, I point out that there are many reasons beside gender why someone unqualified might be promoted. Twiggy says he agrees, but reverts back to complaining about why this female was promoted, when she has not impressed him with her leadership skills. He tries to rally the boys to agree with him that their team has become quite toxic now that she's in charge, and no one likes this. My boyfriend calmly chimes in that they should be careful about how they voice their opinions, as ganging up like this against an employee and badmouthing her behind her back fits the criteria for workplace bullying. You guys are smart, and I know you'll watch your words, he says pointedly. The others mumble and agree that they really do like their new female team lead as a person, but they were a bit surprised she got the promotion.
I agree, I like her too,
Twiggy chimes in. In his no-volume control yell he's spoken the entire night.
But I can understand why she'd be chosen other than for a quota.
My word, he cracked it, guys. He solved the mystery of why she got hired. It was for her tatas. She had them shirt melons. So unfair. How dare she? The others are trying to point out valid reasons why another employee, regardless of gender, might have better or worse qualities for management, and I gave noises affirming their thoughts. Twiggy then goes on a monologue of why he isn't a bigot, since this quota thing is demeaning to women and their skills, and it hurts everyone involved, how he is just a small-town boy who admits he doesn't know anything. But he is so smart, guys. He has such opinions on everything. He likes women, respects women even. No how or why mentioned, though. Or even he starts complimenting me like how I'm so smart, so thoughtful, and I clearly care about my job.
You're smart because you think like me, and people like us are so rare.
I suppose I looked as astonished as I felt at this remark, because he repeated it to me just so there was no confusion that he indeed thought I was as smart and in the same ways smart as he was. And in his mind, it was the highest of compliments. I was speechless.
I wish we'd met before. Hey, boyfriend, we should hire her into our company.
I am nervously chewing on my steak, wondering how I can be so smart when he barely lets me say a damn word over his cringy word salad. Usually I have a baseline of respect for every stranger I meet. That amount of respect I extend goes up or down based on how they treat me, and Twiggy here was draining my respect fast like a sinking ship. Twiggy smiles at me in a dreaming about things I don't want to even imagine way.
Gosh, boyfriend chose such a good specimen for himself. Where's he been hiding you?
I'm feeling emotional whiplash and just alternate between staring at him or chewing my food. My food would never do this to me. I chose to look at food. Food safe, food delicious. Please, food, make this fool go away.
Hey, boyfriend.
He yells at my ear to get my boyfriend's attention, sitting on my other side. I lean back to try to get even a little less scream into my ear.
You chose a good specimen.
Like I'm a cow at the market boyfriend picked up one day. Gross. And why does he need to repeat his stupidity over and over? Once is too many as is. I disassociate and try to divert the conversation into having it with anyone but him. I talk to the other guys, and they all seem normal and cool. We end up talking about travel. Someone has been to Singapore and went to update their work visa in Japan because reasons, and I was asked if I'd been to either country. I said I've been to Japan.
You've been to Japan?
Twiggy beams at me. A few times, I admit. Another one of the guys asks, "Do you speak Japanese?" And I say a little, and that was a mistake. I cannot for the life of me remember which anime-induced weeb screech Twiggy uttered in Japanese while smiling at me like a dweeb. But the cringiness struck me to my core. Just wiped it entirely from my brain. Was it a sugoi or Nabiru? But one of those. He giggled joyfully. I was imploding from sheer schadenfreude. He then explains he has a girlfriend in the Philippines who he is told has to go with him to Japan because he wants to go to Tokyo. Because he thinks it's such a cool place. Notice how no woman has any agency or right to decide when he speaks of them. Because I sure hurt every time he opens his mouth about females. I try to ask, what does his girlfriend want to do?
Boyfriend, you really chose the coolest woman to date. She even speaks Japanese. Oh, hey, by the way, how old are you?
Totally out of left field, no idea why. I let him know I'm in my 30s. He nods, pleased.
You and I are so alike. We're even about the same age. Gosh, you're so cool.
I am dying. Soul exiting the body, going to orbit. Please carry my carcass with you. Someone make him cease. I feel insane, but it does feel like he is coveting me and trying to flirt with me in front of my boyfriend, because every single other person at the table is absolutely normal and civil. Boyfriend either doesn't notice or isn't worried this will lead to anything. Twiggy keeps referring to me as some prized fish boyfriend managed to capture, and telling me how awesome I am, because I am just like him. How I should hang out with them more and be hired to work with them, probably also for more time-spending purposes. I make an excuse to switch seats, and have a much more interesting conversation about free speech, and the difference between opinions and facts with one of the other guys. Twiggy is still screaming about female quotas at the others, having heeded no warnings and learned absolutely nothing. This man will be the source of his own misery, and not even understand why. Oh boy. So yeah, I got steak tonight with a side order of Twiggy. 3. Long, long time ago, I still remember these two people I despise. And yet there isn't enough bleach for my brain and eyes. Yet here is my tale for you guys. The day I slightly died, it was deep inside. Let me be your guide on this fedora tipping ride. Be in trade school, mid-2010s. There was this man-child that came into our trade school and immediately felt that his idea of impressing people was bragging about mundane things. He was younger than me by 3 years, but he was partially bald and had a pubic beard and would gravitate to nerds, geeks, and younger women. To give aspect, he told a trans man he'd be cuter as a woman and said shit like, "What a waste." but would yell about how much he supports Pride. Also, during a D&D game, he would insinuate various fetishes on female players, and the other beardlings would join in. Yet they wonder why women left such a safe and tolerant environment. If the creep factor wasn't high enough already, he would try to mentor 16 and 17-year-olds and get really close to them. Now the bullshit part is he also hung around school staff to ensure its safety. If you said something, the staff would assume it was lies or take it with a grain of salt, and they were on a low sodium diet. Anyway, times I'd seen people confront his ass head-on ended up being terminated from the program, and for some it was the last open door or it was the street, so essentially he was immune to the school rules while punishing others for standing up to his ass. He hung out with other Chris Henson wrong seat fans, such as this one guy who would often tell women, "I'm not staring at your chest, I'm a gentleman," because sexual harassment is a greeting, and this other dude who seriously rocked a trench coat fedora as My Little Pony and gamer buttons also loudly played 8-bit music. Weirdly, he was the least worst of the gang and kinda normal. There's more, but we're focusing on our man-child here. Half a year passes and want women. Great axe, our man-child, finds his better half. This woman, who I can describe as Steve Brule in Trailer Park Themed Drag, appears. She was a total nice girl, and would belittle women around her. Real women have personality, not looks. And anyone who dressed nice and cared about self-appearance in the slightest was a stupid bimbo and body-shamed men. Under 6 feet, she'd call you a manlet, or shorties, and minimen. She was a geek type, but an obnoxious, spiteful geek. They start hanging around at the lunch table of badassery of the Circle of Badasses, aka the Neckbeard table, often going off insulting blue-collar and hard trade students. Then one day I saw them holding hands announcing it at the table. His friends were excited. They got kinda low-key after that. Both then began becoming immense creeps because he wanted a polyamorous relationship, and she wanted one too. Poly couples existed on campus, and to be honest, it was so bad it should have been outlawed because it bred some narcissists. When no women stepped up to their landmine over a wood chipper of a home plate, they decided to outsource. Our Legbeard had a friend who had a borderline personality disorder, and she looked identical to the Legbeard, but more methy. She played third wheel in their relationship, and our Neckbeard was in hog heaven. The poor girl seriously needed psychological help, because her friend the Legbeard seriously gave her some sort of separation anxiety or Stockholm syndrome. I'm not a psychologist, but she definitely had a serious psychological problem. If any other women went near the two, she'd flip the fuck out at them, like Smeagol in The One Ring. Their relationship was a fucked up family, both hyperbolic and how they acted out as a fetish family, sometimes calling her daughter or sister, and it just got creepier and creepier. Well, old habits don't die. As her man-child and his two Legbeards decided they needed more, and they didn't and couldn't find more, even soliciting the other poly couple ran by a weeb Legbeard who had a thing for pale white boys, one being her legitimate stepbrother. That story is for another time, but I seriously want to forget. Well, things are not looking good for the terrible trio as people caught on to their bullshit. One day, he decided to yell down this poor teenager because both Legbeards hated her. This teen, by the way, had a really hard life and PTSD episodes. Neckbeard runs up to her and yells at her, making this young girl run inside, triggering her PTSD intentionally. He had this I am a good boy face, laughing about it. Well, this was his undoing. First off, he pissed me off. My carefree personality went 180 degrees to militant, cold, angry. And on the bus ride back, he jumped into our conversation, as this was his habit. I looked at him square in the eye. Was I fucking talking to you? No? Thought so. Sit down and shut up. Leave us alone. My classmates had never seen me talk like that. They checked on me later, asking what happened. I told them what happened and they got mad. Just like all things, word spread fast enough and the Neckbeard got shut down as we couldn't defeat him on the outside, but we can ostracize him on the inside. He was told off by more and more people. He was called out, "Hey dude, you like picking on little girls, huh?" The lunch table even excluded him from their games. It was the terrible trio against the world. A month later, the man-child quit because no one respects me and I'm going to AmeriCorps. That was his solution. Not make up for his acts, not apologizing for what he did. It was quit the program and run to a program that would probably run him out. Our Neckbeard was terminated incredibly because she threatened another student leaving the third wheel. Third wheel freaked out 2 days into the exodus, where she was throwing everything at the poor RA to get rid of her. Death threats, suicide, freaking out so much security got her and she demanded a ticket home ASAP. So that's our story of fedoras of fire. 4. This happened 15-ish years ago. I'm not sure if he's really a neckbeard or if maybe he was just really clingy, and he was just a couple of years older than me. I'm a 30-year-old female and was 15 at the time this took place. I met this guy, our neckbeard, online. I don't remember if it was on Facebook or on Gaia Online, but it was one of those two. I was a lonely, quiet, reserved kid, so online friendships were my only source of friendship. We talked on and off for a few years, always planning on meeting but never did. He lived only a couple of hours from me, but I was a teenager. Then I meet my boyfriend, at the time, husband now, and stopped talking to the neckbeard until the year in between high school and college. I worked at a call center and made friends with this girl who it turned out was dating him. Small world. He convinced her to drive me the couple of hours to meet him and hang out with the both of them. I didn't think this was a big deal at the time, I was 18-ish, but my boyfriend didn't want me to go alone, so he hopped in the car with us. When we got to the Neckbeards, definitely a confirmed neckbeard in looks at this point, fedora and chains included, I immediately felt oddly uncomfortable. He introduced me to his parents, his pets, etc., but he was ignoring my boyfriend and his girlfriend the entire time. And he kept trying to get me alone. He finally managed after my boyfriend went down to the car to get something, and I was on the receiving end of the longest, most uncomfortable hug I've ever experienced in my life. He was also going on about how much he missed me, etc., etc. We didn't stay long because my friend and I had to work the next day, and we left. A year or so later, I started college. A few months after getting married, the neckbeard emailed me, and my email signature had my married last name plus the college course I was taking. He immediately began questioning me on what my signature meant. Me, being kind of oblivious, just replied, "That's for school-related emails. They wanted the signature to say what course we were taking." But he replied back he meant my last name. I was excited to tell him that I had gotten married and that I was so happy. He had been my friend at one point, and we talked a lot, so I wanted to tell him the good news. After a couple of more emails, he told me that he and my friend had broken up. I didn't hear anything. A couple of years after that, I got an email from him, asking how everything was and was I still with my husband. I told him great, and yes, I was still with him. I heard nothing back. At this point, it was kind of weird, and I mentioned it to my husband, and he said that the neckbeard was checking in to see if I was single yet. I thought he was just seeing it in the wrong light, but whatever. After that one conversation, we didn't mention him again. Cut to a few years after that, when I randomly get an email from the neckbeard, asking if I was still with my husband, again. I told him yes, and asked him how he was doing. He told me he split up with someone, so he was kind of depressed. I told him that he would be fine, and there was someone out there for everyone. Platitudes, of course, though I do really believe that. Then he goes on about how he let his soulmate slip through his fingers, and the girl for him was already with someone else. Well, then I kind of believed my husband. I got him to come and read the email thread, and he told me to tell the neckbeard to stop messaging me. I don't like confrontation, so I didn't want to. My husband messaged him on Facebook and told him to stop messaging me, that we're happy and not going to separate, so he could stop his check-in emails. The neckbeard denied it, of course, but I haven't heard from him since, so it worked. Maybe my husband was just reading it wrong, and that wasn't the neckbeard's intention, but it was still weird. I just realized how long this was, but 15 years is a long time to cover. Thanks for listening. 5. First, let's get to some backstory. I live with my extended family in a 2-story house. My immediate family and I live on one floor, and my cousin and his family on the other. We don't really hang out since we don't share many interests, so most of our interactions boil down to arguments regarding some work on the house itself, repairs and the like. Derek's father was a businessman. He built his company from the ground up, and has been running it for over 20 years. He was able to raise a family, owned several antique cars, and even paid for Derek's additional college education in France. We live in Eastern Europe, and while I cannot say we ever struggled with money, this level of luxury is something very few people here can afford for themselves. I remember Derek to have always been kind of an asshole, but I considered him family and didn't think much of it. He is tall, has a beard belly, has patchy and unkempt hair, and literal black teeth lining his mouth. Never wore a fedora, nor do I remember him having an actual neckbeard, but his usual attire consists of a black shirt and a black suit, which, in my opinion, he washes very rarely or not at all. He was always into LARPing, D&D, Magic the Gathering, and other stereotypically nerdy stuff. He is an atheist and will openly mock and insult anyone who disagrees with him on the topic. Even though he was always on the verge of being a neckbeard, his descent into neckbeardness really started after his dad died and left him inheritance. All of a sudden, Derek found himself in ownership of his father's company, several antique cars, and the house his dad grew up in, a small estate in the countryside, ideal for renting out to tourists. The first sign that something was wrong happened at his dad's funeral, where he refused to enter the church and called everyone else attending the funeral stupid for doing so. Now, I'm not much of a believer myself, but I consider going to church for funerals or weddings simply a part of tradition, and don't think much else of it. Later, we also found out that he refused to pay or have his father's name engraved in his gravestone, proclaiming that to be another stupid practice he doesn't agree with. His dad company tanked mere months after Derek found himself in charge. His dad used to have 2 employees, one of whom was Derek himself. A few days after he started running it, he fired the only other employee, stating that he didn't respect his authority. Note, this employee was both much older and more experienced than Derek himself. He proceeded to try running the company on his own, but due to his attitude of always being right and never taking advice from anyone, he soon found himself not being able to cover his deadlines and was forced to shut it down. He still to this day blames his father for not teaching him how to run the company. In reality, he knew his dad would leave him the company eventually, but never bothered to learn to run it himself. The company estate suffered a similar fate not much later. Where I'm from, if you have a house in the countryside, you are supposed to shut off the water for the winter if you're not living in that house all the time. If you don't, the water in the pipes freezes. The pipes burst, and you find yourself having a fairly expensive repair job to undertake, which usually requires digging up half the floors in the house, fixing the pipes, and then putting the floors back on. He forgot or didn't bother to shut off the water, and the pipes froze, cracked, and started leaking water into the ground. He was contacted by the water company, but refused to pay the water bills and doubled down that it's not his fault. The reasonable, minimal thing he should have done at this point was drive to the estate and shut the water off. I'm guessing that would call into question his innocence in the matter, so he didn't. The water kept leaking for months. He never paid any water bills, and now the bank is threatening to take the house if he doesn't pay the bill, which has reached a sum he definitely can't afford. The apartment he lives in with his mom, younger brother, and wife is always filthy. They have several pets they don't really clean after. You can imagine the sight and smell, and I won't go into the details because I generally stay out of that place unless it's absolutely necessary. Derek's brother, Phil, is a college dropout and doesn't have a job, degree, or any marketable skills. As far as I know, one could describe him as an incel, but since he never really talks or shares anything with me or my family, I can't be sure. Derek and Phil's mom pay the bills and groceries. Derek does have a job, but due to him losing his dad's company, and due to the fact that we live in a small city where rumors tend to get around fast, he wasn't able to get as good a job as the one he had with his father. I'm unsure of exactly what he does for work, but I know the pay is at least half of what he used to make, if not less. Derek's wife Anna is also unemployed and lacks any real education or skills. He rules the household with an iron fist and, by my estimation, considers himself to be the true owner of the entire house. We can often hear him screaming at his family, them arguing, hitting each other, and so on. It has come to the point that Phil is now completely absent. Doesn't talk whatsoever, while their mom spends most of her time with a new boyfriend outside the house. Since Derek refuses to do any repairs on their part of the house, a few months ago we noticed water started leaking from their apartment into our walls. We asked him to do necessary repairs, but he refused. We asked several more times with no success. Finally, my dad decided to do some repairs on our part, which ended up being more expensive, but we decided it was for the best since it saves us having to deal with Derek. Meanwhile, he had other plans. While the repairmen were at our house doing the necessary repairs, Derek decided it was a great idea to come to us and threaten us for not asking his permission to do the repairs. Mind you, the work was being done on our property, not his. My dad eventually managed to get him to leave. The very next day, Derek proposes to arrange a meeting of house owners at his place to discuss how we should act to do repairs in the future. To me, this sounded very suspicious since the term house owners legally refers to Derek, Phil, their mom, and my mom. I was certain Derek had planned to corner my mom and threaten her or something, so he specifically requested that no one but house owners be present in the meeting. I still went. On a side note, I am a 28-year-old male in 6'2", and I've been practicing martial arts like Krav Maga and kickboxing for the last several years. During the meeting, Derek showed me no respect and reiterated that he was very clear in wanting a meeting where only house owners were present. But since it didn't go as he planned, the meeting didn't last long, and nothing specific was discussed. Someone asked me to clarify this house owners term. As to, can one owner kick out someone who is not an owner, or is this kind of behavior the usual practice where I'm from? The short answer is no. In legal terms, repairs, maintenance, etc. are all discussed between residents, as is the usual practice when not using legal means. Owners are the ones who can decide whether or not to sell their property, and who shall inherit the right to do just that. What Derek is trying to do is elevate his position as a resident by the fact that he is also a partial owner, and use that to justify the violent enforcement of authority. Legally, the fact that he is one of the house owners does not elevate him over the other residents in any way. Since this is not a situation with landlords and tenants, but a family home that was once owned by a single person and now has shared ownership between their descendants. Several days ago, we had a deal done with some repairmen to do some other work. The repairman made a mistake on the plans and accidentally put a wall that is in Derek's part of the house into our portion of the bill. The repairman didn't bother to fix his mistake, so he sent the repair plan to both my dad and Derek. My dad didn't want to pay for the work on Derek's wall, so we started arguing. Soon enough, Derek proposed another meeting, this time at our place. My mom, being too polite for her own good, accepted. Minutes pass and Derek, Phil, their mom, and Anna turn up at our door and into our living room. Immediately, Derek sits next to my mom on the sofa, spreads his arms wide, crosses his legs, and puffs his chest, signaling that he is now the dominant man in the house and that he is the boss. The meeting turns hostile almost immediately. Anna tried to play the victim and acted like she was hurt and was on the verge of tears whenever my mom talked to her. She also tried convincing us that if we won't pay for their repairs, the water and humidity damage to our property will be much greater than to theirs. This didn't fly with my mom, who has a doctorate in civil engineering. She starts to explain how things work, and Derek accused her of lying, while also raising his voice and making hand gestures towards her as if he was about to grab or hit her. This is his aunt we're talking about. At this point, the meeting was over, and asked everyone to leave. Everyone started getting up, except Derek. He decided he was going to stay sitting, started swearing at me, screaming at my mom, and proclaiming that he is the owner here, and that I have no right to tell him to leave. This caused my mother to snap, so she slapped him. He immediately gets up, gets in her face, and threatens to call the police for the violence that is being committed against him. I realize he's on his feet and start pushing him out of our home. He refuses to move, still yelling and swearing at us. Somehow, I manage to push him out, and I stand in the doorframe while he continues to yell profanities and threatens to call the cops. After a few minutes of this, I realize that he's not trying to enter the house again, and slowly start to calm down. I'm happy to say I was able to get him out simply by pushing him and didn't have to hit or injure him. Knowing the guy, I doubt he'll try to take any kind of revenge, since he's all tough when it comes to bullying women and guys that are weaker than him, but never someone who is at his level. I do expect him to start messing with our trash or start throwing cigarette butts into our yard, but that's about all. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Neckbeards in the Wild, episode 79. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Right, I don't think we've got any shoutouts or any other business today, so let's just move along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, have you ever partaken of something in entertainment that you think objectively it's bad, it's cheap, it's cheesy, but you still enjoy it? I feel that way about Charmed, the original Charmed, but I still watch it because its cheesiness is part of its appeal for me. There's a book series which is basically a derivative of Charmed. I've spoken about this author before, so I'm not going to say anything bad because while their work, again, I find it somewhat heavily derivative, and that's being generous, I really enjoy the cheapness and cheesiness of the work. So if you have a moment, pop a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.